Well, thanks very much, Adam, and I also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge my colleagues who are here. My Cabinet Minister, Michelle Rowland, who does such an extraordinary job as the Minister for Communications. Sally Situ, thank you very much for the intro. Andrew Charlton, almost a local member, just up the road here, turf wars between Reed and Parramatta here. You're both very welcome, and I thank you for coming, as I do Lisa Lake and Todd Carney, the mayors of Cumberland and Penrith, and the Mayor of Parramatta is here as well, Pierre, Abby Esbar, and to the Dialogue patrons, Lucy Turnbull and Kerry Schott. Thank you for your support today. And I do want to acknowledge my old mate, Brownie, Chris Brown, although there's a few Brownies here as well. JJ's here. It's good to see you here, JJ. Brownie, I rang up the other night, like literally last week. I said, I've got 2-year anniversary coming up of the election next week. I want to do something, I want to give a speech, and I think the appropriate venue to do it would be through the Western Sydney Dialogue. We talked for some time before it became apparent that Chris was in London at the time, and it was 4 a.m. But look at this, he got it done. So thank you very much, Chris and Adam. The Dialogue gets things done and makes a difference. It's a great advocacy network for the people and businesses of Western Sydney, which is why they could achieve this. And thank you to the sponsors as well, the University of Sydney, John Holland and others, including the Venues New South Wales as well. I do want to acknowledge the guests who are here today, all of you, and thank you for your attendance on a Friday afternoon on very short notice. Western Sydney reflects the aspiration that drives Australia, which is why I wanted this to be the venue. The courage, compassion and community spirit that our government works every day to reward and to nourish. The enterprise and initiative of small businesses, the construction workers and apprentices building the new homes and infrastructure that our nation needs, the workers of the care economy, our early educators, healthcare workers, aged care workers and disability carers, so important to our national quality of life and so central to the future strength of our economy. Young people striving to save for their first home or looking to start a family of their own. And everyone studying hard at TAFE in Blacktown or Richmond or Mount Druitt or at Western Sydney University, many of them the first in their family to gain a qualification beyond secondary school. In all of this, Western Sydney tells the biggest story of our nation. Every parent wanting better for their child, every generation determined to do better in the future, every one of us making a contribution to our nation's success. And I'm here today because I recognise that Western Sydney is also a place where these aspirations are under pressure. Western Sydney has made a significant contribution to the 820,000 jobs that have been created in our first 2 years of government. More jobs than have been created in the first term of any new government in Australia's history, and we're just getting started. Here and nationwide, inflation is down, business investment is up, productivity is up, participation is up, annual real wage growth is back. We are projecting back-to-back budget surpluses for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Unemployment remains at a near 50-year low. And the gender pay gap is at a record low. We want to get it to single digits. Achieving this powerful economic combination in a time of global uncertainty is a tribute to the resilience of Australian businesses and Australian workers. But we understand that there are still people doing it tough right now. And I know that when you are living week to week, it's hard to even find the time to think about the future, let alone plan for it with confidence. That's where economic security, from fair wages to reliable services, is not just about making ends meet, it is the foundation for aspiration. And that's why last week's budget was about delivering on the two things that have driven our government for our first 2 years. Firstly, helping people with their cost of living. And secondly, how do we look beyond the immediate? What does Australia's economy look like? How do we make our future right here in Australia? These are the priorities that drive us. And this is also the balance that defines us. Managing the immediate pressures and challenges people around our nation are facing, and doing so in a way that builds and invests for the future. 2 years ago, almost to the day, I promised as Prime Minister to lead a government for all Australians. Our budget kept faith with that in every way. A tax cut for every taxpayer, not just some. Help with energy bills for every household and for every small business. Getting wages moving again for workers in every industry. Making Medicare stronger in every community. Adding superannuation for every working parent or on government-paid parental leave. Expanding access to TAFE and university for everyone in the suburbs and in the regions. And building more homes and new infrastructure in every part of our country. All of this continues and expands the work we've done for 2 years now, making childcare cheaper for over 1 million families, making medicine cheaper for everyone, over 350,000 fee-free TAFE places, increasing rent assistance 2 years in a row, and expanding access to the single parenting payment. At the last election, we promised to open 50 Medicare urgent care clinics. Well, we didn't do that. We opened 58 by Christmas, including in Rooty Hill, Campbelltown, Penrith and Westmead, and have helped hundreds of thousands of Australians see a doctor for free at the same time as we're taking pressure off the emergency departments of our public hospitals. And in last week's budget, we funded another 29 of these Medicare urgent care clinics. For 2 years, we've been focused on helping people deal with the economic shocks and indeed the aftershocks of the pandemic, conflict, and the most significant international energy crisis since the OPEC oil crisis of 1974. While also learning and applying the lessons of what we've been through, taking pressure off families while putting downward pressure on inflation. That was the difficult task that we had. Working to build an economy and society that is more prepared and more resilient ahead of the next shock, which will surely come. And acting on our responsibility to go beyond that. Because while it is important that Australia is ready to weather the next storm, we must also be ready to seize the next wave of opportunity. That's how true security and lasting prosperity are made. Not just responding to change, but anticipating it and then shaping it. And while economic shocks are, by their very nature, unpredictable, the biggest change underway in the global economy right now, indeed the biggest economic change of our lifetimes, is signposted for all to see. Nations representing 92% of the global economy and 97% of Australia's trading partners are signed up to net zero. To get there, every one of these countries will need much more clean energy and much more of all the resources and technology that go into it. the metals and minerals, rare earths and resources our nation has in abundance. Today I make this point. If you could have designed a global opportunity for Australia, you could not have chosen a better starting point than this. And I say starting point very deliberately, because this moment of opportunity must be about more than us extracting and exporting a new mix of resources to a new range of markets. More than just shipping things overseas, watching someone else somewhere else create the jobs and add the value, and then buying them back. This is about using the comparative advantage of our clean energy, our solar, our green hydrogen, and our skilled workers to add value here in Australia, making things here again, moving up the international value chain, creating a new generation of jobs in clean energy and advanced manufacturing and design and technology, and all the flow-on opportunities that will bring right across our economy. That ecosystem of economic growth that drives new breakthroughs and innovations and supports them into commercialisation. So just as our government's plan for cost of living is about helping every Australian under pressure, our plan for a future made in Australia is about bringing new jobs and opportunities to every part of Australia, Western Australia and Western Sydney, the resources industry in our regions and the small businesses in our suburbs, drawing on the talents of all our people to build an economy and society and environment that is better for our whole nation. And so while Western Sydney may not have vast reserves of nickel or lithium, what you are home to is a wealth of resources that are absolutely critical to our future. Great universities and researchers, Australia's largest health and biomedical research precinct, one of the largest industrial and distribution hubs in the Southern Hemisphere, dynamic small businesses and startups, skilled workers in every field, engineers and architects, designers and manufacturers, cybersecurity and digital experts, and diaspora communities that help build and strengthen our international relationships and our trade ties, like the new headquarters of the Centre for Australia-India Relations in Parramatta, a vital connection between Western Sydney, the third biggest economy in Australia, and India, on track to be the third largest economy in the world. A reminder that the success story of modern multiculturalism is a powerful national asset to be cherished, not undermined. And our social cohesion is not something we've lucked into, it's something that we've built together over generations. You see it here in Western Sydney, people of every background and faith and tradition living side by side in harmony, enriched by the diversity of these local communities. That respect and harmony is something all of us can take pride in. And in testing times such as this, it's something that all of us must work to uphold and defend. Our vision for a future made in Australia, like our cost of living, has people at the centre of it. On election night, I spoke about widening the doors of opportunity. Nothing does that like education. And that's why we're expanding University for Australians in growing suburbs and making the student loan system fairer for everyone. We're funding more fee-free places to train the carpenters and electricians and plumbers we need to build new homes. We're supporting the next generation of teachers and nurses and social workers with paid pracs. And we're recognising the extraordinary contribution of this generation of aged care workers and early educators with pay rises that they deserve. After a decade of neglect, that allowed the national energy grid to fall into disrepair. We're putting cleaner, cheaper and more reliable power back into the system. And after a decade in which so many funding decisions were degraded by a pathology of pork barrelling and political conflict, we've created a National Anti-Corruption Commission to help restore people's trust in our institutions. And we're restoring integrity to the infrastructure process as well, cooperating with the state government and local councils and backing that up with real funding dollars. We continued that work in last week's budget, partnering with the New South Wales Government and delivering record investment in social housing, public housing and affordable housing. And I acknowledge the State Member for Parramatta who's here with us today as well. $1 billion for crisis and transitional accommodation for women and children fleeing domestic violence. New funding for urgent works required to support new residential construction, because too often a delay in one minor project, like a local road upgrade or access to energy or water, holds up work on hundreds of new homes. We're building new homes for this growing part of Sydney, and we're building the infrastructure to service that growth, to make local roads safer, to make moving freight easier, and to make sure that people spend less time stuck in traffic and more time where they want to be. This year's budget takes our total investment in Western Sydney infrastructure to $17.3 billion. We're backing 14 new projects, including key upgrades to Mamre Road Stage 2, Elizabeth Drive, Richmond Road, Garfield Road East, Memorial Avenue and Appin Road. We're doubling Roads to Recovery funding for every single local council. And we're providing $20 million to work with the New South Wales Government to expand the scope of South West Sydney rail planning, including extending that line to Macarthur. We're matching this investment and this ambition with proper planning. On Tuesday, I was in Westmead, a major housing, public-private part housing project that our government funded within our 6 months in office. 400 new units, half of which will be affordable homes for essential workers working in that Westmead precinct, meaning that those essential workers will be able to afford to live closer to their work and closer to the community where they are needed. Good economic policy, but also good social policy. It reminded me of something my mentor, Tom Uren, often used to say about his time as Minister for Urban and Regional Development. He used to say, we can't deal with things in boxes. You need a whole of government approach, and you need an approach that works with different levels of government and indeed with the private sector. That is the key to driving this change. Because in a fast-growing, fast-moving community, everything is interconnected. You can't wait until a project is complete before you start thinking about supporting infrastructure or public transport links. That's especially important right now, when we are just 2 years away from the first plane landing at Western Sydney Airport. Opening that airport will open the world to Western Sydney, and it will realign the dynamic of the way that this great global city functions. For the first time, instead of everything turning in towards the CBD and Sydney Harbour, people will look out. It will be a game changer. They'll be looking out not just to the state-of-the-art airport, but they'll be looking as well to the new jobs of the Aerotropolis. Two of the biggest generators of economic activity a region can have are an airport or a university, which is why I've been a champion of both. In my younger years, running a campaign through Young Labor for Western Sydney University, and later on campaigning strongly for the need to have a Western Sydney airport. Western Sydney will be home to both, and we're building the infrastructure and housing and energy to make sure this region and our nation get the best from both. I've spoken to the Western Sydney Dialogue before about the contribution that infrastructure makes to our economy and to our community, the role the Commonwealth can play in the health and strength of our cities and suburbs and regions. It's something I've been passionate about for a long time, and it takes patience as well as passion. Earlier this year, I opened the Moorebank Intermodal Interstate Rail Terminal. I turned the first sod on it more than a decade earlier as the Infrastructure Minister. A world's best practice project, a public-private partnership fully powered by renewable energy, saving 3,000 truck journeys a day, especially on the M5. A project that we've been supporting at the Commonwealth level since 2008, whereas I advocated for a new airport for Western Sydney in my first speech back in 1996. Building big, building to last, building for the best, that always takes time. It's true for infrastructure, but it's also true for the work of government as a whole. And in the same way that you can't evaluate an infrastructure project on the basis of whether or not you'll be around to open it, you can't decide whether or not to tackle a problem based on how quick or simple it is to solve. Government isn't about making the easy decisions. It's about the right decisions for the right reasons. And that is the approach that my colleagues and I, sitting around the Cabinet table, have taken. It wasn't the easy decision to change the allocation of tax cuts. It was absolutely the right decision in the interests of working people and in the interests of our economy. We've taken those decisions in job creation and job security, in wages and in productivity, in Medicare, aged care, childcare, energy and education and the environment and housing and infrastructure. Equality for women, that is at the heart of my government's agenda, be it pay, opportunity or safety. It's true here at home and on the world stage. The work that we have done over the last 2 years to invest in our capabilities, but also to invest in our relationships, to get Australia back at the table as a respected voice, a valued contributor and a trusted partner, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, to stabilise our relationship with China and clear away impediments to trade. Of course, in all of these fields, we know that there is more work to be done. There are still problems that we have to solve, still opportunities we must grasp. What I want every Australian to know is that the challenges that we've faced through the past 2 years have only strengthened my determination to deliver and my confidence that our country can indeed succeed. I've always been an optimist about Australia, and everything I've learnt and seen as Prime Minister has only made me more optimistic for our nation's future. In my first speech as Labor leader, 5 years ago now, back in 2019, I talked about Australians suffering from conflict fatigue, the frustration and exhaustion people felt at the fact that the then government treated every issue as just a pretext for picking a phony fight with Labor, with the states, with local government, with unions, with scientists and experts, with each other. We've made it a priority to change that, to consult, to cooperate, to listen, to respect people's views and to seek common ground. That is a strength. By contrast, my opponent goes around telling business leaders who look to work with us that they are weak. But there is a world of difference between talking tough and working hard. In politics, wrecking is always easier than building, and looking for someone to blame is much simpler than finding a solution. But that's not strength. It's the soft option, and we know where that takes us. We've seen what happens when the only test that politicians apply is their political self-interest. We saw it with the former PM, and we're seeing it with the current opposition leader. Saying no to everything is the easiest thing to do in opposition, but it builds nothing, it helps no one, and it takes our country nowhere. Governing Australia requires more than sound bites. You need substantial propositions. The stakes right now are too high for the shallow and shambolic approach we see too often from the opposition, whether it be in the past week from migration or on their nuclear non-policy announcements. The challenges that we face are too urgent to retreat to denial and delay. The progress we've made together is too important to go back to fear and division. The opportunities we have before us are too big for small-minded negativity, and Australians have worked too hard to be dragged back to the era of conflict fatigue. Serving as Prime Minister is indeed the greatest honour of my life. I count every day of the 2 years I've spent in this job as an extraordinary privilege, and I'm absolutely determined to make every single day count. Because the true privilege of public life at every level is the opportunity to make a positive difference to people's lives. Sally spoke about that in her introductory speech about the privilege of being a local MP and making a difference there. I understand that Australians are doing it tough right now, and I certainly haven't forgotten what it's like to struggle and to strive, to worry about your family's economic security, to wonder if you'll get the opportunity to pursue your aspirations. That's my life story and the life story of so many people here in Western Sydney. That understanding drives our government, helping with the challenges that Australians are facing here and now, building for the opportunities of the decade ahead, delivering the reforms that ensure no one is held back, achieving the progress that ensures that no one is left behind, so Australians can make a good life for themselves, and so we can make our future right here in Australia. Thanks very much.